From the outside, Amaka lived every woman's dream. Married to David, the billionaire mogul whose name alone opened doors. She had it all, or so the world believed. The mansion was massive. 14 rooms. Chandeliers imported from Italy. Cars lined the driveway like a showroom. People whispered, "She's lucky. She hit the jackpot." If you're just tuning in, please subscribe to our channel, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us where you're watching from. This story will stay in your heart forever. But inside those golden gates, Amaka was a prisoner. She cooked every meal with her bare hands, using broken pots. She swept the marble floors herself. No cleaner, no cook, no help. David, he said, a good woman should manage. While he spent millions on his dog's diamond collars and took private trips abroad alone, Amaka begged for basic things. A new bra, sanitary pads, even slippers. She wore the same clothes for years. Faded, torn, forgotten. And every time she opened her mouth to ask for more, David's cold eyes reminded her, "You are not a priority." 7 years of silence. 7 years of shrinking. The world saw a queen, but Amaka, she was surviving, and the cracks were starting to show. Love is supposed to feel like safety, like home, but for Amaka, love felt like walking on glass. Every morning, she woke up before the sun, cooked breakfast, ironed David's clothes, packed his lunch, all in silence. No good morning, no thank you, no smile, and when he spoke, it was to criticize. "The stew has too much oil. You forgot to polish my shoes. You're gaining weight." Each word chipped away at her spirit. Yet outside, David held her waist tightly for cameras. "My beautiful wife," he would say. He was charming in public, smiling, generous, even affectionate. But the moment the doors shut, silence, distance, cold. Amaka used to ask herself, what did I do wrong? Now, she asked, when did I stop being human in his eyes? She couldn't even call her family. David said they were too poor and would beg him for money. So she stayed silent, alone. Every corner of that mansion reminded her, this isn't love. This is survival in a cage made of gold. But something inside her was slowly waking up. It was on a Sunday afternoon when the contrast hit hardest. David threw a birthday party for his dogs. Yes, his dogs. Imported treats. A professional dog chef. Custom-made outfits. Over 2 million Nigerian nairas spent in one day. Amaka watched silently from the kitchen window, wiping her hands on her old wrapper, her stomach growling from skipping breakfast. One of the guests laughed. "Your wife is so humble." Not even at the party. David smiled. "She likes to stay low." Low? She was kept low. Amaka hadn't had new underwear in over a year. Her slippers had holes. And her birthday? It passed quietly last month. No text, no hug, not even a boiled egg. But the dogs had cake. That night, while scrubbing the party mess off the marble floor, her fingers bleeding, Amaka looked at herself in the glass and whispered, "Am I even alive or just existing?" That night, something broke inside her. Or maybe something finally began to awaken. Because when a woman realizes she's worth more than what she's given, change becomes a matter of time. Amaka had been pushing her body beyond its limits for years. Cooking, cleaning, washing, enduring. But on this particular Tuesday, her body gave up. She hadn't eaten all day. David said there wasn't enough meat in the soup, so he refused to eat and refused to give her money for food. Still, she swept the living room, washed the curtains, tried to fix a broken pipe in the kitchen. Then everything went blurry. She clutched the counter. Her legs shook, and the next thing she knew, darkness. She collapsed. David, hearing the sound, walked in. But instead of panic, he sneered. "You're pretending. Get up and cook," he said, stepping over her like she was dirt. She didn't move. It wasn't until a security guard, bless his heart, saw her on the floor and called a neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, that help finally came. Amaka woke up in a hospital bed, hooked to drips, surrounded by strangers. David wasn't there. She looked around, confused, and tears filled her eyes. Because for the first time in years, someone had chosen to help her, not out of duty, but out of care. And that changed everything. Mrs. Johnson had lived next door for years. A widow in her late 50s, quiet, gentle. The kind of woman who watered her plants with care and always had a warm smile for the gateman. But Amaka had never spoken to her. David didn't like neighbors. He said they were nosy. So Amaka stayed away until the day she collapsed. Mrs. Johnson brought her food that evening in the hospital. Jollof rice, fried plantain, even bottled water. Amaka wept as she ate, not because of hunger, but kindness. When Amaka returned home, Mrs. Johnson didn't stop. She came by every other day with small things, pap, fresh tomatoes, even slippers. "I used to be someone's wife too," she'd say softly. "Don't ever think you're alone." Amaka didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to being cared for. One day, Mrs. Johnson's son, Tun, followed her over to fix a leaking tap in Amaka's kitchen. He was calm, respectful, funny even. It was strange, being helped without begging, being seen. Amaka didn't know it yet, but the winds were changing. For the first time in a long time, she was being treated like a human being. Amaka didn't remember the last time she smiled. Not out of politeness, not for show. A real smile, one that reached her eyes. But it happened one quiet afternoon. Tun had stopped by again, this time with tools to fix the bathroom door that had been broken for months. David had refused to fix it, saying, "Why do you need privacy? You live alone in this house." But Tun didn't ask questions. He just got to work, humming as he tightened screws. Then he said something, a small joke about how even the bathroom was trying to escape the house. And for the first time in years, Amaka laughed. Not a forced laugh, a real, surprised one. She caught herself and looked down, embarrassed. But Tun just smiled. "You look better when you laugh," he said softly. "Don't stop." Her heart fluttered. Not romantically, not yet, but something inside her softened. It wasn't about falling for another man. It was about remembering what it felt like to be alive. That afternoon, Amaka made tea and poured 2 cups. For the first time in years, she had company and peace. David noticed the change. Amaka didn't nag him anymore. She didn't beg for anything. She simply became quiet, peaceful, and one day he saw something that rattled him. Tun was at the gate, handing Amaka a small box, a simple cake with "Happy Birthday, Amaka" written in soft pink icing. David watched from his car window, hidden behind tinted glass. Amaka smiled, not politely, but genuinely. A small laugh even escaped her lips. That was a smile David hadn't seen in years. That night, for the first time in a long while, David couldn't sleep. He paced the mansion halls, glanced at old photos of their wedding, opened her wardrobe, still full of worn, faded clothes. He kept her small, and now someone else would show her care. It bruised his pride. Not his heart, his pride. The next morning, he handed her an envelope with 1 million Nigerian nairas. "No woman of mine should live like a beggar," he said coldly. But it was too late, because Amaka had tasted something she hadn't in years. Dignity. And no amount of money could buy that back. David wasn't used to being ignored. So when Amaka did react to the 1 million Nigerian nairas, he tossed away. He upped his game. The next day, a brand new iPhone arrived, the latest model. Then a car, a red Benz with a big ribbon tied to it. Next, a delivery of designer handbags, perfumes, and gold jewelry. Neighbors whispered, "Wow, her husband is spoiling her." But Amaka just stood at the front door, arms folded, eyes cold, because she knew this wasn't love. It was guilt, fear, ego. David didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't ask if she was okay, or if she needed slippers or a new bra, or even proper food. No, he threw wealth at her, like it was a broom meant to sweep the past away. But Amaka had learned something powerful. Peace is worth more than presents. And no matter how shiny the car, it wouldn't undo the nights she cried herself to sleep. She closed the door on the Benz. And for the first time, David stood on the porch, rich, furious, and completely powerless. Because money can't fix what neglect destroyed. David was loud with his money, but Amaka, she was quiet with her pain. In the days that followed his gift parade, she said nothing, no arguments, no thanks, no anger, just silence. And that silence screamed louder than any words. She no longer waited for him at the door, no longer served his meals with a forced smile. She no longer asked for anything. One evening, David sat at the dinner table, alone. The food was cold. The house was quiet. And for the first time, he felt the emptiness. He turned on the TV, flipped through channels, scrolled through his phone. Still silence. Because Amaka was upstairs, sitting by the window with a pen and paper, writing for first time in years. Not a letter, not a note, a plan. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but she knew she couldn't live another year like this. She was tired of feeling invisible, and in that silence, a decision was growing, because sometimes a woman doesn't need to shout to say she's done. The day started like any other, but inside Amaka, something had shifted. She looked in the mirror, not to admire herself, but to see herself. The woman staring back was tired, scarred, but still standing. She packed a small bag, not with clothes or jewelry, but with the only things that mattered: her ID card, her certificates, her notebook, and a pair of flat shoes. Downstairs, David was on the phone, shouting at his driver. He didn't even notice her walking past. At the gate, she paused, looked back once. This mansion had been her prison for 7 years, filled with gold, but empty of love. And for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She stepped out, not to run away to another man, not to chase revenge, but to chase herself, her freedom, her sanity, her peace. When David looked up later and realized she was gone, he panicked, called her phone. No answer. Asked the staff. Blank faces. But it was too late, because a woman doesn't leave when she's angry. She leaves when she's done. And Amaka was finally done. Amaka didn't go far. She moved into a modest one-room apartment behind a local clinic. Just a small space with cracked walls, a creaky fan, and no chandelier in sight. But it was hers. She swept the floor herself, cooked with one pot, slept on a thin mattress on the ground. And yet she had peace. No barking dogs. No cold stares. No gold-plated silence. Just the sound of her own breathing, her own thoughts, her own space. Mrs. Johnson came by with food. Tun brought a small table and a mattress. Nobody asked questions. They just showed up. That night, Amaka lit a candle because there was no electricity yet. She sat on the floor, eating rice with her hands, smiling softly. It wasn't luxury, but it was peace. And after 7 years of sleeping in a mansion where her spirit couldn't rest, this small room felt like home. Because sometimes it's not about what you have, it's about what doesn't have you. Back at the mansion, things were different. David came home to silence. No aroma of stew waiting. No iron shirts laid out. No footsteps in the hallway. Just cold, expensive emptiness. The dogs barked. The generator hummed. But the house felt dead. He called her again. No response. Tried to track her. Nothing. David wasn't used to being ignored, especially by someone he thought he owned. He told himself, she'll come back. She's just trying to teach me a lesson. But days passed. Then a week. Still nothing. He stood in the kitchen one evening and stared at the broken pot on the floor. The same pot Amaka once used to cook with bleeding hands. He had laughed at her once for keeping it. Now, it was the only thing that made the kitchen feel real. Suddenly, his gold watch felt heavy, his imported chair uncomfortable. Because what good is a mansion when there's no one left to love you or even notice you? For the first time, David wasn't angry. He was empty, and he knew, deep down, he might have lost her for good. Amaka didn't have much, but for the first time in years, she had control. She woke up with the sunrise, not to serve anyone, but to plan her day. She ironed her clothes herself, carried her CV in a brown envelope, walked under the sun, looking for a job. She got turned down. again, and again, but each rejection felt better than begging David for money. Then, one day, a small local school took her in as an assistant teacher. The pay was low. The work was tiring. But when she entered the classroom and the children called her Auntie Amaka, she smiled. It wasn't about the money. It was about value. She came home sweaty, but satisfied, sat on her mattress, ate her food, and slept peacefully. She didn't have AC or a washing machine or 10 bedrooms, but she had herself. And with each passing day, Amaka realized something powerful. You don't need a perfect start. You just need a real one. And finally, she was living a life that was hers. Not borrowed, not controlled. Hers. David had everything except sleep. The bed felt wider. The nights felt longer. And for the first time, he noticed the absence of small things. The sound of her footsteps. The way she hummed while cooking. The quiet way she tucked in his shirt collar before he left for work. Now, just silence. He opened her old drawer one night, looking for a charger, and found something instead. A small notebook. Inside were lists. Notes. Dreams. Things I wish I could do. What love should feel like. Reasons I stayed. Each line hit him like a punch to the chest, because he hadn't just ignored her needs. He had ignored her existence. Suddenly, the house wasn't just quiet. It was haunting. He picked up his phone, dialed again. Still no answer. And for the first time, David whispered something into the dark that he never thought he'd say. I think I messed up, but no voice came back. Because some things once broken, stay broken. And some women, once free, never return. Amaka almost forgot it was her birthday. There were no banners, no balloons, no perfume bags waiting at the door. But when she arrived at school that morning, the children surprised her. They sang for her, off-key, joyful voices. One little girl handed her a handmade card with happy birthday, Auntie Amaka, written in red crayon. Her eyes welled with tears. At break time, Mrs. Johnson and Tund arrived, not with gold or diamonds, but with thoughtfulness. A small vanilla cake, a second-hand but beautiful wristwatch, a bouquet of fresh flowers. Amaka stood frozen, then laughed, a deep, rich laugh. She didn't need chandeliers. She didn't need designer clothes. She had love, real, simple love. They all sat outside under a tree, eating cake from paper plates, laughing about nothing. And in that moment, Amaka realized this was the first time in years she felt celebrated. Not for being someone's wife, not for surviving, just for being Amaka. That night, she didn't cry herself to sleep. She smiled and whispered, "Happy birthday" to me. Because finally she meant it. David finally found her. It had taken weeks, calls, bribes, even visiting Mrs. Johnson's compound in person. When Amaka opened the door and saw him standing there, dressed in his finest suit, roses in hand, she felt nothing. No fear, no hate, just calm. He spoke carefully. "I was wrong," he said. "I didn't treat you right. I took you for granted. Please come home." Amaka stood silently, arms crossed. She wasn't cruel, just tired. He pointed to his car parked outside. "Whatever you want, clothes, trips, anything. I'll give it." But she shook her head. "I didn't leave because I wanted gifts, David. I left because I wanted respect." He stared at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, he realized she wasn't his wife anymore. She was her own woman. David swallowed hard. "So you're not coming back?" Amaka smiled softly. "I already did. I came back to myself." And she closed the door. Behind it, she leaned against the wall. No tears, no shaking, just peace. Because sometimes healing means walking away, even when they finally say sorry. Tund never rushed her. He didn't flirt, didn't push. He simply showed up, fixing leaky taps, helping kids with homework, checking in after work. One Saturday, Amaka invited him to share lunch. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. They sat on the floor, eating yam and egg sauce, laughing over a silly TV show on her small screen. It wasn't a date. It was something deeper. Comfort. He noticed her favorite mug was chipped and bought her a new one. Not expensive, just thoughtful. She didn't feel butterflies around Tund. She felt safe. And after years of walking on eggshells, that safety felt like a miracle. One evening, he looked at her and said, "You don't have to be strong all the time." And just like that, her eyes filled with tears. Because no one had ever said that to her before. Not her husband. Not her friends. No one. In that moment, Amaka didn't fall in love. She rose into it. Not with man, but with what love was supposed to be. Weeks later, Amaka received an envelope at her school. Inside was an invitation, embossed in gold, with David's signature at the bottom. It was for a charity gala in her name, to honor the strength of women who rise. It felt surreal. David had turned her story into a spotlight event, a new foundation he'd created, with cameras, celebrities, and media coverage. She stared at the invitation for a long time. Was it guilt? Was it an attempt to clean his image? Mrs. Johnson said, "You don't owe him anything." Tund added gently, "But you do owe yourself closure." Amaka decided to go. Not for David. Not for attention. For herself. That evening, she stepped into hall in a simple, elegant dress. No makeup artist. No designer heels. Just dignity. When David saw her from across the room, his mouth parted slightly, as if seeing her for the first time. But Amaka wasn't there for him. She was there to stand tall, to speak for the women who hadn't found their voices yet. And for once, all eyes were on her, not as David's wife, but as Amaka. The lights dimmed. A hush fell across the gala hall. Then they called her name, Mrs. Amaka Bello, to share her story. She rose slowly, walked to the podium. David watched in the front row, surrounded by press, smiling politely, as if he was proud. But Amaka didn't speak for him. She looked out at the audience, women, girls, strangers, and took a deep breath. "I used to live in a 14-room mansion, but I slept with fear," she began. Her voice was steady, her truth sharp. "I wore old clothes while dogs wore diamonds. I begged for pads while gold chains were bought for pets." The room went silent. But this isn't a story about pain. It's a story about waking up. She paused, meeting David's eyes. "I didn't leave because of another man. I left because I chose myself." People clapped. Some cried. David blinked, froze in his seat, unable to stop the applause. Amaka stepped down, head high. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was leading, and for the first time in her life, she felt seen. Weeks passed after the gala. The video of Amaka's speech went viral. Women across the country shared it, whispering, "She spoke for all of us." She was invited to schools, women's groups, even TV shows, not as a victim, but as a voice. But through it all, Amaka stayed grounded. She still lived in her small apartment, still taught children in her modest classroom, still drank tea from the mug Tund gave her. One evening, Tund walked her home from work. The sun was setting. The street was quiet. He asked gently, "Do you miss him?" She thought for a moment, then shook her head. "I miss who I hoped he would be, but I love who I've become more." He smiled. They didn't hold hands, didn't kiss, just walked together, because sometimes love isn't loud. It's quiet, safe, free. That night, Amaka lit a candle, sat by her window, and wrote in her notebook, "I am not what I lost. I am what I survived." Outside, the world moved on, but inside, she had finally arrived, at peace. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this message. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and what act of kindness inspired you today. Thanks for being part of this journey. Until next time, remember, even the smallest act of kindness can change a life.